Hey guys, tonight we're stepping into the shadows with some of the most dangerous people who ever smiled at you across a dinner table. Spies. Not the tuxedo-wearing, martini-sipping, exploding pen kind from the movies. I'm talking about the real ones. The quiet neighbor who always waved. The co-worker who never missed a birthday. The polite man photographing birds in the park who was actually memorizing an entire government. America's most dangerous spies didn't lurk in dark alleys with trench coats and dramatic music. They hid in plain sight, mowing lawns and attending parent-teacher meetings while quietly betraying nations. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And a sincere thank you to the listener who suggested tonight's topic. Your ideas really do shape this channel, and I'd be lost without them. Let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's quietly listening from around the world. And if you'd rather drift off without a screen glowing in your face, the channel is now on Spotify too, the link's in the description. And if you'd like a little more, membership is already available on the channel, which gives you access to 8 hours of ad-free video to drift off to, uninterrupted whenever you like. Now dim the lights, switch on a fan for that soft background hum, get comfortable, and maybe don't mention any of this to your neighbours. Let's pause for a second. Have you ever wondered what it actually felt like to live a double life? Could you smile at the mailman while hiding microfilm inside a hollow coin in your coat pocket? Would you remember your fake name, your fake job, and your fake wife's fake maiden name, all before your first cup of coffee? Could you sit through a dinner party knowing one careless word might get you hanged and still find the strength to compliment the casserole? Would you last a single week being followed, watched, and quietly suspected? Or would you crack the moment a stranger held eye contact one beat too long? And could you keep the biggest secret of your entire life while living on a cul-de-sac, wedged between a retired school teacher and a man who is deeply, spiritually in love with his leaf blower? Well, congratulations. You've just woken up in 1953 in a tidy little house on a quiet American street, with a forgettable face, a forgettable name, and a secret that could get you killed. Try to act normal. Let's start with a hard truth. Almost no one becomes a spy because it sounded fun on career day. You didn't sit in school doodling little daggers and thinking, one day I'll betray my country from a split-level ranch house. Real spies were pulled into the shadows by 4 boring, painfully human things: money, belief, ego, or blackmail. Maybe you were broke and someone offered to fix that. Maybe you believed in a cause so hard you convinced yourself the treason was actually loyalty. Maybe you just wanted to feel important, like the smartest person in every room while everyone else stayed clueless. Whatever dragged you in, one thing is certain: you didn't wake up dangerous. You slowly, quietly agreed to it, one small favour at a time, until there was no honest way back. And that first favour always seemed harmless. A document that wasn't really classified. A conversation someone just wanted a little context on. A name, a schedule, a rumour. It felt less like espionage and more like gossip with slightly higher stakes, which is exactly how they wanted it to feel. Nobody hands you a cloak and a code name on day one. That would scare off any sane person. Instead, they let you wade in ankle deep, assuring you the water's fine, and by the time it's up to your neck, you've already done enough that turning back means confessing. It's the same logic as agreeing to help a friend move one box, and somehow ending up carrying a couch up 4 flights of stairs at midnight. The truly unsettling part is how ordinary the motivations were. You'd like to imagine spies as tormented ideologues wrestling with grand questions of loyalty and destiny. Mostly they were people with a mortgage, people passed over for a promotion they were sure they deserved, people who felt invisible and desperately wanted to matter to someone, anyone, even a stranger who was clearly using them. Resentment turns out to be one of history's most reliable recruiting tools. Give a bitter person enough attention and a reason to feel special, and you'd be amazed what they'll quietly slide across a table. It's less James Bond and more a very sad performance review with international consequences. There is a reason the phrase "he seemed so normal" follows nearly every unmasked spy. Because they were normal, achingly so. They coached the kids' teams, they brought a dish to the potluck, they grumbled about taxes and traffic and the price of gas like everybody else. Danger, it turns out, doesn't announce itself with a menacing theme song. It wears a cardigan and asks about your weekend. The most effective traitors in history looked exactly like the least interesting people you'd ever meet, and that camouflage wasn't an accident. It was the entire strategy, built on the comfortable human assumption that the person mowing the lawn next door couldn't possibly be memorizing troop movements between passes. So no, nobody grows up dreaming of this. You don't choose it in a single dramatic moment of villainy. You back into it, slowly, through a series of small choices that each felt survivable at the time. And that's the quietly terrifying thing to carry with you as you drift off. The line between an ordinary person and a dangerous one isn't a wall, it's a slope. A gentle, well-lit, perfectly reasonable slope, with a very charming person standing at the bottom, holding your coffee, waiting patiently for you to take just one more step. Before you ever passed a secret, someone had to notice you. That someone was a handler, a recruiter, a patient professional whose entire job was spotting people with access, weaknesses, and just enough resentment to be useful. They didn't march up and ask you to spy. That would be insane. Instead, they befriended you. They bought the coffee, they laughed at your jokes, they listened to you complain about your boss for the 9th time and nodded like you were a misunderstood genius. It felt like friendship. It was actually a job interview you didn't know you were taking. And by the time they asked for that first tiny piece of information, you already felt like you owed them. The genius of a good handler was patience that bordered on the inhuman. This wasn't a quick con, it was a slow cultivation, sometimes stretching across months or even years. They studied you like a gardener studies soil. What did you want? What did you lack? What wound had never quite healed? A skilled recruiter could sit across from you at lunch and quietly catalogue every insecurity you'd ever let slip, filing them away for later like a very attentive, very sinister therapist. You thought you'd finally found someone who got you. What you'd actually found was someone taking meticulous mental notes on which of your buttons pushed easiest, and they were experts at the art of the small ask. They never opened with treason. They opened with a favour so minor it barely registered. You wouldn't happen to know how your department handles that, would you? Just curious. A harmless question over drinks. A little professional insight a friend might share with any other friend. You answered, because why wouldn't you? It cost you nothing. Except it did. Because now a precedent existed. A tiny thread connecting you to them. And the next ask was slightly larger, and the one after that larger still. It's the same trick a store uses with a free sample. Nobody feels indebted over a toothpick of cheese, right up until they're standing at the register holding $40 of it. Money, when it finally appeared, was handled with the same delicacy. Rarely a dramatic briefcase of cash. More often a quiet, let me get this one that gradually became, Here's a little something for your trouble. Once you accepted payment, even small payment, the relationship shifted permanently. You weren't a friend doing favors anymore. You were being compensated, and compensation implies an arrangement, and arrangements have expectations. The handler knew this the whole time. You were the one who found out slowly, usually around the moment you realized you couldn't remember the last time this friendship had involved anything that wasn't, in some quiet way, a transaction. What makes the handler so chilling in hindsight is how genuinely likable they had to be. This wasn't a shadowy figure in a trench coat. It was the warmest, most engaging person you knew. Charm was their primary weapon, warmth their favorite tool, and your loneliness their raw material. They succeeded precisely because betrayal, when done well, doesn't feel like betrayal from the inside. It feels like being finally understood. So as you settle in tonight, here's the thought to rest on. The most dangerous person who ever entered a spy's life didn't arrive with threats or weapons. They arrived with a smile, a listening ear, and an unsettling ability to remember exactly how you took your coffee. Now let's talk about your cover identity, which spies called a legend because apparently even espionage needed a dramatic word for lying. A good legend wasn't just a fake name. It was an entire invented life with a fake childhood, a fake hometown, fake parents, and a fake reason for the slight accent you couldn't quite lose. Take the man Americans came to know as Rudolf Abel, who ran a Soviet network out of Brooklyn while posing as a mild-mannered photographer and painter. Nobody suspected the quiet artist in the studio was one of the most important spies in the country. That was the whole point. Your fake life had to be more convincing than your real one, which honestly wasn't hard because your real one now mostly involved anxiety and hiding things in your walls. Constructing a legend was less like telling a lie and more like writing an entire novel you then had to live inside forever without ever breaking character. Every detail needed to hold up. If your cover said you grew up in a particular town, you better know the name of its main street, its high school mascot, and what the weather did in October. Investigators love to probe the small stuff, the trivia a real local would know without thinking. It's like being asked, mid-conversation, to name your own childhood teachers, except a wrong answer doesn't earn an awkward pause. It earns a very serious follow-up question from someone who has stopped smiling. The cruelest tests were the casual ones. A stranger at a party who happened to be from your hometown, lighting up and asking if that old diner on the corner was still open. Now you're performing improv with your life on the line, either bluffing convincingly or steering the conversation somewhere safer without looking like you're steering at all. Real spies rehearse these moments obsessively, running through likely questions the way an actor drills lines. The difference is that when an actor forgets a line, the worst outcome is a bad review. When you forgot yours, the review came from a government, and it was not favourable. Then there was the exhausting problem of physical evidence. A convincing human being leaves a paper trail. Documents, records, letters, the small archaeological debris of a real existence. So a proper legend came with props, forged papers, planted references, a backstory stitched together from just enough truth to feel authentic. The best legends borrowed from reality wherever possible, because pure invention is fragile, but a lie wrapped around a genuine detail is sturdy. You might keep your real love of fishing, your real fondness for a particular song, small, honest fragments smuggled into a fictional person, because those true pieces were the ones you'd never fumble under pressure. But here's the part that wore spies down to the bone. You couldn't ever stop performing. There was no green room, no moment off stage. No chance to exhale and just be yourself. The legend followed you to the dinner table, into your friendships, sometimes into your own home. Play a role long enough, every waking hour, for years, and the line between the invented person and the real one starts to blur alarmingly. Some spies reported forgetting which memories were genuinely theirs. So as you drift towards sleep tonight, safe in the luxury of being exactly one person, consider the strange exhaustion of the spy who had to be someone else so completely, for so long, that they occasionally had to stop and quietly remind themselves who they had actually been to begin with. You probably imagine spies being trained in some sleek facility, dodging lasers and cracking safes while a stern instructor times them with a stopwatch. Reality was far less cinematic. Training was cramped rooms, endless memorization, and being told to repeat your fake biography until you could recite it half asleep with a fever. You learned to notice things, exits, faces, whether the same grey car had passed you twice. You practiced acting relaxed, which is somehow the hardest thing a nervous human can do. There were no graduation ceremonies and definitely no diplomas, because a certificate reading "Congratulations, you're a spy" now is possibly the worst piece of evidence ever created. Most of the actual curriculum was memory work, and it was brutal. You couldn't carry notes, notes get found, and found notes get you killed. So everything lived in your head. Names, codes, procedures, the precise sequence of steps for a dozen different situations. You drilled it the way a student crams for an exam they can never stop taking, except this exam followed you into the street and occasionally tried to have you arrested. If you've ever blanked on someone's name 2 seconds after being introduced, imagine that same brain being asked to flawlessly recall an encrypted meeting schedule under pressure, in public, while pretending to admire a store window. A huge chunk of training was simply learning to see. Ordinary people walk through the world half asleep, oblivious to everything that isn't directly in their path. A spy had to be the exact opposite, constantly, quietly aware. Who just entered the cafe? Which car has lingered too long? Is that person's stroll a little too aimless to be real? You trained yourself into a state of permanent gentle alertness, cataloguing your surroundings without ever appearing to look at them. It's like the heightened awareness you feel walking to your car alone in a dark parking lot, except you are expected to maintain that feeling every waking moment, for years, while looking utterly bored. And then, cruelly, you had to learn to fake being relaxed, which is far harder than it sounds. A nervous person is a memorable person, and memorable is deadly. So you rehearsed calm the way others rehearse a speech. The loose shoulders, the easy smile, the unhurried pace of someone with absolutely nothing to hide. Your heart could be hammering hard enough to crack a rib, and your face had to say, "Lovely weather we're having." Anyone who's ever tried to look casual while walking past a group of people staring at them knows the agony. Now imagine your entire freedom depending on nailing that performance every single day without a single visible crack. The final insult was that all this training left no trace, by design. No certificate, no yearbook, no proud photo on the wall. The whole point was to become someone whose skills were invisible and whose education never happened. You emerge from it not as a polished super agent, but as a deeply tired person who now flinched at parked cars and couldn't enter a room without instinctively locating the exits. So as you lie there tonight, drifting off without a single coded schedule to memorize, appreciate the simple peace of a mind that's allowed to wander. The trained spy never got that. Their mind was always working, always watching, always rehearsing calm right up until the exhausting moment they finally blessedly got to sleep. Here's a secret about secret agents. Most of your life was staggeringly dull, and that was by design. To hide in plain sight, you needed a cover job so ordinary that people's eyes glazed over when you described it. You were an accountant, a salesman, a photographer, a translator, a nobody. You went to the office, you filed the papers, you complained about the coffee, you attended meetings that made you want to weep. The genius of it was that boredom is the perfect disguise. Nobody suspects the man yawning through a budget review of secretly running one of the most dangerous operations in the country. Your greatest weapon wasn't a gun, it was being forgettable. The cover job wasn't just camouflage, though, it was infrastructure. A believable profession explained your income, your schedule, your movements, and your occasional need to travel. A travelling salesman could cross regions without raising an eyebrow. A photographer had a perfectly innocent reason to carry cameras and lenses and to linger in odd places pointing them at things. A translator had a reason to possess foreign documents and know foreign languages. The best cover jobs did double duty, hiding the spy while quietly enabling the very activities the spy needed to perform. It was less a disguise draped over the work and more a costume that came with its own useful props. But maintaining the boring job was its own exhausting performance, because you actually had to do it. You couldn't just claim to be an accountant and then fumble every number. A suspicious lifestyle attracts attention, and so does obvious incompetence. So you genuinely showed up, genuinely produced the reports, genuinely sat through the soul-crushing quarterly review while a colleague droned on about synergy. In a bleakly funny way, many spies worked 2 full-time jobs, the espionage and the dreary cover career they had to keep afloat to protect it. Imagine risking your life all night and still having to explain a discrepancy in the expense spreadsheet the next morning. There was a peculiar loneliness baked into the ordinary job too. Your co-workers thought they knew you. They invited you to lunch, they shared their frustrations, they treated you as a colleague and sometimes a friend, and you smiled and played along, all while knowing the person they thought they were talking to didn't fully exist. You were the reliable guy from the 3rd floor, the one who always remembered the birthdays, and none of them had the faintest idea that the polite fellow refilling the coffee pot spent his evenings encoding messages meant to be read a continent away. Few things are lonelier than being genuinely liked for a person you invented. And that was the whole quiet triumph of it. The most dangerous people don't look dangerous. They look like the least interesting person in the office. History's great secret agents didn't glide through casinos in tailored suits. They trudged through parking lots in sensible shoes, carrying a lunch they packed themselves. The disguise worked precisely because it was so relentlessly mundane that nobody bothered to look twice. So the next time you sit through a meeting so tedious it makes you question your life choices, take a strange comfort in this. That very boredom, that beige, forgettable ordinariness you're enduring, was once the finest camouflage a spy could ever wear. Somewhere, someone hid an entire double life behind a face exactly as tired as yours. Then came the hardest performance of all, being a normal neighbour. You had to wave at the right times, remember everyone's dog's name, and pretend to care deeply about the ongoing drama regarding the shared fence line. You attended barbecues where a man named Gary told you the same fishing story every single year, and you laughed like it was fresh. You couldn't be too friendly, or people got curious about you. You couldn't be too distant, or people got suspicious. You had to land in the exact centre of unremarkable, which is an art form so subtle that most actual actors couldn't pull it off. Meanwhile, inside your pleasant little home, there was a radio you'd cheerfully die before letting anyone find. Neighbourhoods, it turns out, are surveillance networks that run entirely on nosiness, and no one signed up for the job. Mrs. Henderson across the street knew when your lights went on and off. The retired gentleman next door noticed every car that wasn't usually there. The kids on their bikes saw everything and forgot nothing. A spy learned quickly that the greatest threat wasn't a foreign counterintelligence officer. It was a bored resident with a good view of the cul-de-sac and absolutely nothing better to do. You couldn't fool them with clever tradecraft. You could only fool them by being so aggressively normal that their attention slid right off you. So you played your part in the endless neighbourhood theatre. You waved from the driveway. You made small talk about the weather, with the practiced ease of someone who'd rehearsed small talk about the weather. You accepted the extra zucchini from the overproductive garden 2 doors down and pretended to be delighted. Every one of these interactions was a tiny test, and you passed them the way you passed everything, by giving people exactly the amount of ordinary they expected, and not a molecule more. It was the social equivalent of walking a tightrope, except the tightrope was a conversation about lawn care, and falling meant a curious neighbour might start to wonder. The barbecues and block parties were their own special ordeal. On the surface, you were relaxed, holding a paper plate, nodding along, one of the gang. Underneath, you were working. You were tracking who was watching, steering away from questions that cut too close, quietly making sure your invented history never contradicted itself across 3 separate conversations, and you had to do it while genuinely appearing to have a nice time, because a person who looks miserable at a party is a person people remember and discuss. So you laughed at Gary's fishing story for the 5th consecutive year, and somewhere behind your friendly eyes, a very tired part of you gently wept. The deepest irony was that being a good neighbour required a kind of warmth you couldn't actually afford to feel. Real friendship means letting people close, and you could never let anyone close, because close is where the questions live. So you offered everyone a warm, convincing, permanently guarded version of yourself, familiar enough to be trusted and shallow enough to be safe. As you settle into bed tonight, in a home where you can be entirely unguardedly yourself, spare a thought for the spy who couldn't. The one who waved at the neighbours, remembered every dog's name, laughed at every tired joke, and went inside each night to a house that was less a home than a very well-decorated hiding place. Now let's talk about passing secrets without ever being seen, because meeting your contact face-to-face was a fantastic way to get you both arrested. Enter the dead drop, a hidden spot where you left a package and walked away, and later someone else retrieved it, so the two of you never had to be in the same place at the same time. A loose brick, a hollow tree, a magnetic container stuck under a bridge. A signal, like a piece of tape on a lamppost, told your contact the drop was ready. It sounds elegant until you picture yourself, a grown adult, crouching in a public park at dawn, jamming a film canister under a rock while praying no jogger asks what you're doing. Espionage. Equal parts danger and profound embarrassment. The beauty of the dead drop was that it broke the most dangerous link in the chain, the meeting. 2 spies standing together is a photograph waiting to happen, a connection an investigator can draw a line through. But a dead drop separated them in time and space entirely. You left the package, you vanished. Hours or days later, your contact appeared, retrieved it, and vanished too. To any watcher, there was nothing to see but 2 unrelated strangers who happened, at different moments, to walk past the same unremarkable tree. It was a way of holding a conversation with someone you might never lay eyes on, whispering across a gap so wide that no one could see both ends of it. But the location was everything, and choosing one was agony. It had to be public enough that lingering there for a moment looked natural, yet private enough that the actual handoff went unseen. It had to be accessible in all weather and reachable without doing anything memorable, and it had to be a place neither of you would look suspicious visiting. A park bench, a hollow behind a loose stone in a wall, the underside of a public stairwell. Spies became obsessive amateur surveyors of their own cities, mentally logging every crevice and shadow, seeing the ordinary landscape as a vast board of potential hiding spots that normal people walked past without a thought. Then came the signals, the quiet grammar of the whole system. How did your contact know the drop was loaded and waiting? A chalk mark on a wall, a strip of tape on a lamppost, a thumbtack pressed into a particular telephone pole. These innocent little marks were a secret language written across the public world, invisible to everyone who didn't know to look. You'd walk your route, spot the agreed-upon signal, and know the package was ready, all without a single word exchanged. It was ingenious, and it was also faintly absurd. An international operation quietly conducted through the medium of tape and chalk, like a deadly game left by children. And yet the actual moment of the drop was pure, sweating terror. There you were, a trained professional, crouched by a rock at first light, heart pounding, performing the least dignified maneuver of your career while trying to look like someone who simply enjoys examining rocks. A dog walker rounds the corner. A jogger slows down. Every innocent passerby becomes, for a few horrible seconds, a potential catastrophe. So the next time you drift off tonight, picture that scene. A hardened agent, entrusted with the secrets of nations, hiding a canister under a stone and speed-walking away with the guilty energy of someone who's just done something deeply, profoundly weird. Danger and dignity, it turns out, rarely occupied the same park at the same time. Sometimes you did have to pass something directly, and for that you used the brush pass, a maneuver so quick it barely happened. You and your contact walked past each other in a crowd, and in one fluid, casual second, an envelope changed hands. No stopping, no talking, no dramatic eye contact, just two strangers crossing paths in a busy station, while the entire fate of an operation flickered between their fingers. The trick was to look utterly bored while doing it, which is difficult when your heart is trying to escape through your ribs. Do it right, and no one noticed a thing. Do it wrong, and you just handed classified secrets to a very confused stranger who was only trying to catch his train. The brush pass lived and died on timing, and the timing was merciless. You had a fraction of a second, one clean beat as two paths intersected, to complete a handoff and keep walking as though nothing had occurred. There was no room to fumble, no chance to try again, no graceful recovery if the envelope slipped. It's like the awkward moment when you and a stranger both reach for the same door handle. Except you've rehearsed it 100 times, your lives depend on it going smoothly, and afterward you must never, ever acknowledge that it happened. Real spies practice this the way athletes practice a single, flawless motion, over and over, until their hands could do it without their nerves interfering. Crowds were the essential ingredient, the friend and the enemy all at once. A busy train station, a packed sidewalk, a bustling market. These were perfect, because a crowd is chaos, and chaos hides 1,000 small motions. Two people brushing past each other among hundreds of others is invisible. The same two people meeting on an empty street is a scene, so you chose your ground carefully, always seeking the anonymity of the throng. But the crowd cut both ways. In all that jostling motion, a mistimed step or an unexpected shove could send your handoff sprawling, scattering your operation across a station floor for everyone to see. The performance around the pass mattered as much as the pass itself. Before it, you had to arrive looking like nothing, just another commuter with somewhere to be. During it, your face had to remain a mask of pleasant indifference, betraying nothing while your fingers did the most important thing they do all week. And after it, the hardest part. You had to keep walking at the exact same pace, resisting every screaming instinct to glance back, to check, to confirm. Looking back is what gets you caught. The whole illusion depended on you treating the single most tense moment of your day as though it were as forgettable as scratching your nose. What made the brush pass so quietly astonishing was how much rode on so little. An entire chain of intelligence, weeks of careful work, the safety of multiple people, all condensed into one silent second between two strangers who would never speak. Blink and you'd miss it, which was precisely the point. So as you lie there tonight, think of that anonymous instant in some long-ago crowded station. Two ordinary-looking people, walking in opposite directions, faces blank, hearts hammering, passing the fate of an operation between them in the space of a single step, before dissolving back into the crowd as though they'd never crossed paths at all. History, it turns out, sometimes changed hands in less time than it takes to yawn. Long before you ever crouched in a park, American spies were already hiding messages in plain sight. During the Revolutionary War, George Washington's culper ring wrote secret notes in a special invisible ink they called sympathetic stain, tucking their real messages between the lines of harmless-looking letters. A note about the weather and Aunt Martha's health might secretly carry the movements of the entire British Army, readable only with the right chemical reagent. It was ingenious, and it meant that any dull letter could be a weapon. As a spy, you learned the same lesson. The most dangerous words are the ones no one can even see. Also, you now flinched every time someone borrowed a pen. The concept was gloriously simple and maddeningly practical. Write your real secret in a substance that dried invisible, then write an ordinary, boring letter right over and around it in normal ink. To anyone who intercepted the message, it was just a dull note between friends or family, hardly worth a second glance. But apply the right heat or the right chemical, and the hidden words rose up out of nowhere like a ghost surfacing through paper. An enemy could hold the entire secret in his hands, read every visible word and hand it right back, none the wiser. The information wasn't locked away, it was simply invisible, hiding in the white space of something dismissible. The culper ring took this to remarkable lengths, and their caution was the reason they survived. They combined the invisible ink with codes and false names, layering secret upon secret so that even a discovered message revealed little. Members were known by numbers rather than names. Ordinary correspondence carried extraordinary cargo. The whole network functioned like a normal exchange of tedious letters, chatter about crops and health and local news, while beneath that placid surface flowed a steady current of military intelligence bound for Washington himself. It worked so well that some of its members' true identities stayed secret for well over a century afterward. The real elegance was in choosing the perfect cover text, because the visible letter had to be believable. Too strange, and it drew attention. Too empty, and it seemed pointless. So spies wrote convincingly mundane letters, full of exactly the sort of forgettable domestic detail that makes the eye slide right past. The more boring the visible message, the safer the invisible one. There's a dark comedy to it. Generations of spies labouring to write the dullest possible prose, perfecting the art of the letter no one would ever want to finish reading, also that the words that actually mattered could ride along unseen beneath the tedium, and the lesson echoed straight through the centuries of American espionage that followed. The tools evolved endlessly, the invisible ink giving way to microdots and hidden code, but the core idea never changed. The safest secret is one no one even knows is there. You don't have to guard a message an enemy can't see. So as you drift towards sleep tonight, consider the strange power of the invisible word, a hidden truth folded quietly inside a harmless one, waiting patiently for the right eyes and the right heat. And maybe glance, just once, at that perfectly ordinary letter on your counter, the one about nothing in particular, and wonder, briefly, what might be resting silently between its lines. Even visible messages had to be scrambled beyond recognition, so you drowned yourself in codes. Names became numbers, cities became symbols, and whole sentences turned into strings of gibberish that would take an enemy years to crack, if ever. The finest of these was the one-time pad, a code so mathematically perfect that, used correctly and only once, it was essentially unbreakable. The catch was that it required patience, precision, and hours hunched over paper doing what was basically the world's tensest arithmetic homework. One slip, one repeated page, and the whole thing could unravel. So there you were, a hardened secret agent sweating over a math worksheet like a schoolchild, except failing this one could get you executed. The logic of codes was ancient and beautifully paranoid. Assume your message will be intercepted always, and make sure that when it is, it reveals nothing. So you replaced the dangerous words with harmless-looking substitutes, turned meaning into noise, and trusted that the enemy staring at your gibberish would find only a headache. A code was less a lock than a fog, thick enough that even if someone seized your message, they'd be left holding a page of nonsense with no idea whether it described troop movements or a grocery list. The information was right in front of them and utterly out of reach. The one-time pad was the crown jewel of this world, and understanding why is oddly satisfying. It used a random key, as long as the message itself, shared only between sender and receiver, and used exactly once before being destroyed. Because the key was truly random and never reused, there was no pattern for an enemy to find, no repetition to exploit, no thread to pull. Done properly, it was the closest thing espionage ever had to perfect secrecy. The vulnerability was never the math. It was the humans. Reuse a page, cut a corner, get lazy on a long night, and the flawless system suddenly had a crack, and cracks in this business had a way of becoming nooses. The work itself was punishing in the most unglamorous way imaginable. Encoding and decoding by hand meant hours of meticulous, mind-numbing effort, converting each character, checking each step, knowing that a single arithmetic error could turn a vital message into garbage or worse, into something an enemy could unpick. There's nothing cinematic about it. Picture your dangerous secret agent not leaping across rooftops, but sitting alone at a small table late at night, surrounded by scrap paper, quietly muttering numbers, rubbing tired eyes, doing careful sums by lamplight. The romance of espionage tended to evaporate somewhere around the third hour of manual calculation, and the stakes hovering over that tedious little worksheet were absolute. A mistake in ordinary homework earns a red mark. A mistake here could expose a network, doom a source, or send you to the gallows. That gap between the boredom of the task and the horror of the consequences was the strange, permanent tension of a spy's life. So as you settle in tonight, free from any coded message you must decrypt before dawn, take a moment to appreciate the quiet luxury of a mind at rest. Somewhere in the past, a spy sat hunched over columns of numbers in the dark, doing the loneliest arithmetic in the world, knowing that the difference between a clean escape and a fatal error came down to whether they'd added correctly at 2 a.m. Somewhere in your very normal home was a very abnormal secret. A radio transmitter used to send your coded messages across the world in bursts of static. Operating it was a nightmare of nerves. You transmitted quickly in the dead of night, because the longer you broadcast, the easier it was for someone to trace exactly which cozy little house the signals were leaking out of. You memorized schedules, you whispered numbers into the dark, and you lived in constant terror that your neighbour would knock and ask why your lights flickered at 3 a.m. Ham radio hobby, you'd say, smiling, dying a little inside. The attic wasn't for storage. It was the most dangerous room in the house. The radio was your lifeline and your leash all at once. It was the one tool that let you reach your handlers across an ocean, and it was also the single object most likely to get you caught. A hidden message under a rock is passive. It just sits there. A transmitter actively shouts your location into the air, and there were people whose entire job was listening for exactly that shout. So you treated the thing with the wary respect you'd give a sleeping animal that could turn on you, useful, necessary, and never for one moment to be trusted. Then there was the delicate horror of hiding the equipment itself. A transmitter wasn't small, and its presence in your ordinary home demanded a very good explanation you desperately hoped no one would ever ask for. So it lived tucked into an attic, buried in a closet, disguised among innocent belongings, ready to be broken down and concealed at a moment's notice. Some spies became experts at rapid disassembly, capable of turning an incriminating radio into a pile of harmless-looking parts, faster than you could answer a doorbell. It was the espionage version of frantically shoving everything into a closet when guests arrive early, except the mess you were hiding could get you hanged. The act of transmitting was pure, concentrated dread. You worked against the clock every single time because signals could be tracked, and the tracking got more precise the longer you stayed on the air. Vans with hidden equipment prowled cities listening for illicit broadcasts, triangulating, narrowing the search block by block, so you sent your message in a tight, fast burst and got off the air as quickly as you could, tapping out your coded numbers with the frantic efficiency of someone who knows a clock is ticking somewhere they can't see. Every second on the air was a second someone might be drawing a line straight toward your front door. And the cover story was always laughably thin, held together by nothing but confidence and luck. If a curious neighbour noticed odd hours or strange equipment, you had your explanation ready: a harmless hobby, a passion for radios, an eccentric interest that explained the wires and the late nights. It usually worked, because people are trusting and hobbies are boring, but you never fully relaxed. Every knock at the door, every friendly question about your interests sent a cold jolt through you. So as you drift off tonight in a home where the most dangerous appliance is a smoke detector with a low battery, picture the spy in the attic at 3 a.m, hunched over a glowing dial, whispering numbers into the static, one ear on the message and one ear straining always for the sound of a car slowing down outside. The genius of hiding in plain sight extended to your objects too. Secrets weren't kept in obvious briefcases handcuffed to your wrist. They were tucked inside the most boring items imaginable. A message could be shrunk down to a microdot, a speck of film the size of a period at the end of a sentence, and glued right into a letter where no one would ever think to look. The man known as Rudolf Abel was famously undone in part by a hollow nickel, a coin split in two to hide microfilm, which accidentally ended up in circulation and eventually reached the authorities. Imagine your entire operation compromised because someone gave the wrong 5 cents as change. The devil was in the details, and so it turned out was your downfall. The whole philosophy was to weaponize the unremarkable. A briefcase chained to your wrist announces that you're carrying something precious. It may as well be a flashing sign reading, "Search me." So spies did the opposite. They hid their secrets inside the objects nobody would ever suspect. The pocket change, the pen, the shaving kit, the everyday clutter that fills every human life. The best hiding place wasn't a vault. It was an object so dull that the eye refused to linger on it. You didn't guard the secret with locks. You guarded it with sheer aggressive ordinariness. The microdot was the crown jewel of this approach, an almost magical feat of miniaturization. A full page of information could be photographed and shrunk down until it was smaller than a typed period, then hidden in plain sight on an ordinary document. You could mail an entire stolen report disguised as the innocent dot at the end of a sentence in a chatty letter about the family. To find it, an enemy would have to suspect it existed, and then examine your correspondence under magnification, letter by letter, punctuation mark by punctuation mark. It was hiding an ocean inside a raindrop, and it worked precisely because no one thinks to interrogate a full stop. Then there were the concealment devices, the hollowed-out everyday objects that spies loved with an almost childlike glee. Coins that unscrewed, batteries that weren't batteries, shaving brushes with hidden compartments, ordinary things that had been quietly gutted and repurposed to carry film, codes, or contact information. The craftsmanship could be genuinely impressive, seams invisible to the naked eye, mechanisms you'd never find unless you knew exactly where to press. You could hold one of these objects, turn it over in your hand, use it for its supposed purpose, and never suspect it held a secret capable of toppling an operation. But that same cleverness carried a cruel fragility, as the hollow nickel proved so perfectly. The entire point of a concealment device was to be indistinguishable from the real thing, which meant it could be lost, spent, or handed away by mistake exactly like the real thing. One careless moment, one coin dropped into the wrong pocket and passed along as ordinary change, and your untraceable secret was suddenly rattling around loose in the world, waiting for the wrong curious person to notice it felt a little too light. So, as you settle in tonight, glance at the boring objects on your nightstand, the coins, the pen, the odds and ends, and take quiet comfort that they are exactly what they appear to be. The spy never had that luxury. For them, the most innocent object in the room was often the one holding the secret that could end everything. Forget elaborate rubber masks and fake mustaches peeling off in the rain. Your best disguise was simply being aggressively unmemorable. You wore ordinary clothes in ordinary colours. You had an ordinary haircut. You practiced an expression so pleasantly neutral that witnesses later couldn't agree on whether you were tall or short, young or old, there or not. The goal was to be the human equivalent of beige. When you did alter your look, it was subtle, a change of coat, a different walk, glasses you didn't need, small tweaks that made you blur in the memory. Real spies didn't want to look mysterious. Mysterious gets remembered. You wanted to be the guy everyone was absolutely sure they'd never seen before, even if they'd seen you every day. The mistake amateurs made was thinking disguise meant transformation, dramatic costumes and fake noses like something from a stage play. But a costume is a spectacle, and spectacle sticks in the mind. The professional understood that the finest disguise was the absence of anything worth describing. If a witness later tried to recall you, they should come up empty, groping for a detail and finding only a vague impression of a person who was, well, a person. You weren't trying to look like someone else. You were trying to look like no one at all. Achieving that beige invisibility took real discipline, oddly enough. You dressed to match your surroundings, blending into whatever crowd you moved through, never a shade too bright or a style too distinct. You avoided anything a person might latch onto, the loud tie, the unusual bag, the memorable shoes. You made yourself into visual wallpaper, present but unnoticed, the human equivalent of hold music. It's the exact opposite of how most people want to be seen. You spent your whole life engineering the one thing everyone else quietly dreads, being completely, utterly forgettable. And your face did the heaviest lifting of all. You cultivated an expression of mild, pleasant blankness, the look of someone thinking about nothing in particular, going about their unremarkable day. No scowl to unsettle people, no dazzling smile to charm and imprint, just a neutral, agreeable nothing that the eye passed over without catching. Some spies practiced this the way others practice a poker face, smoothing away every flicker of tension or intent until their features gave nothing back. A memorable face is a liability. A blank one is a fortress. When actual alteration was needed, it came in whispers, not shouts. A different coat to change your silhouette. A shift in posture, a slower gait, a slight stoop that suggested a different sort of person entirely. Glasses you didn't need, because people remember the man with glasses and forget the man behind them. Small, quiet adjustments that nudged you just far enough from your earlier self to break the thread of recognition. You didn't become a new person. You became a slightly different smudge. So as you lie there tonight, secure in being exactly, vividly yourself, spare a thought for the spy who spent a lifetime perfecting the art of being no one, moving through the world like a rumour, seen by everyone and remembered by no one, a face that dissolved from memory the very instant it left the room. Here's where it got genuinely heartbreaking. Sometimes your entire family was part of the disguise. A spouse, children, a home full of school photos and grocery lists. All of it made you look wonderfully, believably normal. In some cases, both partners were in on it, quietly running an operation together while raising kids who had no idea their parents' accents, names, and history were all invented. The children were real. The life around them was theatre. You tucked them in at night, you helped with homework, and you carried a secret so heavy that one honest word from a curious child could bring the whole thing crashing down. Nothing hides a spy better than a minivan and a soccer schedule. A family was the ultimate cover, because a family's the very picture of a settled, harmless life. A single man who keeps odd hours and lives alone invites questions. A married couple with kids, a mortgage, and a schedule packed with recitals and dentist appointments looks like the least suspicious thing on earth. Who could possibly imagine that the tired parents chaperoning the school trip were running an intelligence network? The domestic ordinariness was so complete, so relentlessly wholesome, that it deflected suspicion automatically. Your children's normal lives quietly certified your fake one. In the cases where both partners were agents, the marriage itself became an operation, which is a strange and slightly chilling thing to sit with. They coordinated, covered for each other, kept the same stories straight, and maintained the performance across every hour of every day, even at home. There was no offstage, because the house was part of the stage. Imagine a marriage where the deepest shared secret wasn't an affair or a debt, but a hidden radio and two invented identities, held together not just by love but by mutual, constant, high-stakes deception. Date night for them might have involved coordinating a dead drop. The children, though, are where the whole thing turns quietly tragic. They were entirely real, entirely innocent, and entirely in the dark. They grew up believing their parents were exactly who they claimed to be, never suspecting that the family history they'd been told was fiction, that their own last name might be an invention. They were the most convincing part of the cover precisely because their belief was genuine. You can't detect a lie the children don't know they're telling, and every innocent, unguarded thing a child might blurt out to a teacher or a neighbour became a small landmine the parents had to quietly step around forever. Living this way demanded a coldness that must have warred constantly with genuine love, and that's the part that lingers. These were real parents who really tucked their kids in, really worried over their fevers, really cheered at their games, and yet everything surrounding that love was a construction, a beautiful house built on a hidden foundation of lies that could collapse at any moment. So as you settle in tonight, in a home where your history is simply your history and your name is simply your name, consider the strange sorrow of the family that was also a disguise, where the love was real, the children were real, the bedtime stories were real, and almost everything else. The names, the past, the very ground they stood on was a performance that could never, ever end. Now, about the money, because for many spies, greed was both the reason and the ruin. You risked your life for payment, but the moment you actually spent that payment, you became a walking red flag. Consider Aldrich Ames, a mid-level intelligence officer whose salary suddenly could not explain his expensive new car and lavish home. People notice when a government employee starts living like a movie producer. The cardinal rule was to hide your wealth, to stay boring, to resist every urge to enjoy the fortune you'd sold your soul for. But greed is patient and stupid, and again spies were undone not by a daring enemy, but by a suspiciously nice house and a receipt they never should have left behind. The cruel irony was total. You became a spy for the money, and the money was the very thing most likely to destroy you. Betraying your country was apparently easier to hide than a new sports car, because espionage is invisible, but wealth is loud. A secret past in a park leaves no trace, but a lifestyle that outpaces your salary leaves a trail any accountant could follow. You could keep the biggest secret in the world and still be undone by the simple, mathematical fact that your spending didn't add up. Aldrich Ames became the textbook cautionary tale precisely because his greed was so gloriously undisciplined. A man on a government paycheck does not casually purchase an expensive home and drive a luxury car without someone eventually doing the arithmetic. And people did notice. Colleagues wondered quietly how he managed it. The information he sold caused staggering damage, but what helped bring him down in the end was mundane and almost comic. He lived too well, too openly, and the gap between what he earned and what he spent was a question that hung in the air until someone finally chased the answer. The rule every disciplined spy knew by heart was simple and agonizing. Hide the money, live modestly, keep the wealth locked away, unspent, invisible. Resist the very reward you'd risk everything to earn. But that discipline ran directly against the grain of human nature, because what's the point of a fortune you can never touch? People who betray their country for cash tend not to be people gifted with patience and self-denial. So the money burned a hole in their lives, whispering temptations, until sooner or later they bought the thing, took the trip, upgraded the life, and lit the fuse on their own destruction. And the spending left its own evidence, quietly damning. Receipts, records, purchases, the paper residue of a life lived beyond its means. financial trails are notoriously hard to erase, and investigators learn to love them because numbers don't lie and they don't crack under pressure. Follow the money and you find the spy. So as you drift off tonight, free from any secret fortune you're forbidden to enjoy, consider the strange trap at the heart of it all. A person clever enough to deceive an entire nation, brought down not by a rival agent or a daring capture, but by the oldest weakness in the book, the simple, human, ruinous inability to resist enjoying the very money they betrayed everything to get. For a long time, the perfect spy was a woman, precisely because so many powerful men refused to believe a woman could be dangerous. During the Civil War, Rose O'Neal Greenhow charmed Washington's elite while passing Confederate secrets, and Belle Boyd gathered information so boldly she became famous for it. On the other side, Elizabeth Van Lew ran a Union spy network in the heart of the Confederacy, while playing the harmless eccentric, a role so convincing people called her Crazy Bet and stopped watching her entirely. That was the whole trick. Society underestimated these women completely, and they turned that blindness into a weapon. Nothing hides in plain sight quite like a person everyone has already decided isn't worth suspecting. The advantage these women held was baked into the prejudices of their time, and they exploited it ruthlessly. A society that could not imagine a woman as a serious political threat simply did not watch women closely. Doors that stayed locked to men swung open for them. Conversations that would have halted at a stranger's approach continued freely, because who worried about the charming lady in the parlour? The very dismissiveness meant to keep women powerless became, in the right hands, a near-perfect cloak. They were hiding in plain sight before they ever did a thing, simply by being who they were in a world that refused to take them seriously. Rose O'Neal Greenhow worked this angle with dazzling skill, moving through Washington's high social circles as a celebrated hostess. Powerful men relaxed in her company, flattered by her attention, loosened by the comfort of a friendly, admiring presence. And she listened, and she remembered, and she passed what she gathered to the Confederacy. Belle Boyd took the opposite approach, gathering intelligence with a boldness that eventually made her a household name, proving that audacity, too, could be a form of camouflage in a world that didn't expect it from a young woman. Elizabeth Van Lew may be the most brilliant of them all, because she weaponized her own reputation for ruin. Living in the Confederate capital itself, she deliberately cultivated the image of a harmless eccentric, muttering, distracted, a bit unhinged. People called her Crazy Bet and stopped paying her any mind, which was precisely the point. Behind that carefully performed madness, she ran a sophisticated Union spy network right in the enemy's heart. She understood something profound. If people decide you're not worth watching, they stop watching, and a person no one watches can accomplish almost anything. The deeper lesson threaded through all their stories is that invisibility isn't only about coats and codes. Sometimes it's handed to you by other people's assumptions. These women were underestimated, dismissed and overlooked, and they took that dismissal and sharpened it into one of the finest edges in the whole craft. The blindness of their enemies was their greatest asset, freely given and never suspected. So as you settle in tonight, consider the quiet power of being underestimated, and the generations of women who turn the world's refusal to see them into the perfect place to hide. They vanished not into shadows, but into plain sight, protected by nothing more than the arrogant certainty of everyone who'd already decided they couldn't possibly matter. Some of the most dangerous intelligence in history wasn't stolen from a safe. It was spoken out loud by someone who trusted the wrong companion. Spies learned early that people confess astonishing things when they feel safe, flattered, or admired. A careless official bragging over dinner, a lonely clerk desperate to feel interesting, a powerful man showing off to impress company, all of them leaking secrets they'd have died to protect if they'd only known who was listening. Your job was to be warm, attentive, and endlessly interested in whatever tedious thing they had to say. It's a grim thought before bed, but many empires have wobbled not because of a break-in, but because someone talked too much to someone who seemed too nice. The uncomfortable truth is that humans are leaky, and no lock can fix a wagging tongue. People simply love to talk, especially about themselves, especially when they feel important, and this bottomless need to be seen and admired has undone more secrets than any safecracker ever did. A spy didn't always need to steal. Often, they only needed to listen. The information walked right out of people's mouths, offered freely, sometimes eagerly, to anyone who made them feel interesting enough to keep going. The greatest weapon in this game wasn't a lockpick. It was a patient, admiring silence. So spies cultivated the art of being the perfect audience, and it's a genuinely disarming skill. They leaned in, they laughed at the right moments, they asked the follow-up question that made a person feel like the most fascinating creature in the room. Under that warm, flattering attention, targets bloomed like flowers in sunlight, saying more than they meant to, reaching for another impressive detail to keep the glow going. It's the same reason people overshare with a good bartender or a friendly stranger on a train. Feeling truly listened to is intoxicating, and intoxicated people get careless. Loneliness, in particular, was a vein of pure gold. A lonely clerk, an overlooked functionary, someone starved for connection and significance. These were treasures to a patient spy. Offer such a person genuine seeming interest, real conversation, the feeling of finally mattering to someone, and they might hand over the world just to keep that feeling alive. It's bleak, but it's deeply human. People will trade astonishing secrets not for money or ideology, but simply to be, for once, the interesting one, the trusted one, the person someone actually wanted to hear. And pride was the other great leak, the swagger of the powerful man determined to impress. Boasting is confession wearing a confident smile. The official who name-dropped to seem connected, the insider who hinted at things he shouldn't know to seem important, the big shot who couldn't resist showing off, each of them narrating their own downfall to look impressive to a stranger who was quietly memorizing every word. So as you drift off tonight, safe among people who've earned your trust, remember the oldest and simplest lesson in all of espionage. The most fortified secret in the world can be undone by nothing more than a warm smile, a patient ear, and the eternal human weakness for talking a little too much to someone who seems little too nice. Some spies weren't foreign agents sneaking in, they were your own people, turning coats from the inside, and history remembers them with a special kind of disgust. The name Benedict Arnold became American shorthand for betrayal after this celebrated Revolutionary War general secretly plotted to hand over the fort at West Point to the British. Centuries later, men like Aldrich Ames and Robert Hanssen betrayed their own agencies from within. Trusted insiders quietly selling the nation's deepest secrets for years. These were the most dangerous spies of all, because they weren't hiding at the edges of society. They were sitting at its very centre, respected, promoted, and completely trusted, right up until the moment everyone realised the calls had been coming from inside the house. The insider traitor was uniquely devastating because trust itself was their weapon. A foreign agent has to sneak past the walls. The insider is already inside, holding the keys, greeted with a smile every morning. They didn't have to break in because they'd been invited to stay. Their access wasn't stolen. It was granted freely by people who had every reason to believe in them. That's what made the betrayal cut so much deeper. It wasn't the enemy at the gate. It was the trusted friend who'd been quietly unlocking the gate the whole time. Benedict Arnold became the enduring name for it, and for good reason. He wasn't some obscure figure. He was a respected general, a man with a real record, someone the cause had every reason to rely on, and he plotted to hand a critical fort straight to the enemy. The scheme was ultimately exposed, but the shock of it burned his name into the language forever. To this day, calling someone a Benedict Arnold needs no further explanation. That's the peculiar immortality of the insider traitor. They're remembered not for what they built, but for the trust they shattered. Centuries later, the same poison surfaced in modern form, and if anything, it was worse, because it lasted longer. Men like Aldrich Ames and Robert Hanssen sat at the very centre of American intelligence, trusted colleagues with access to the nation's most guarded secrets, and they sold those secrets over years. Not a single dramatic act of betrayal, but a long, patient, grinding treachery conducted from inside a trusted chair. Every day they came to work, greeted co-workers, did their jobs, and quietly continued handing away information that got people killed. The damage was immense precisely because it went on so long, hidden behind a face everyone had decided to trust. What makes the insider so chilling is how thoroughly they exploited the one thing every organization must have to function: faith in its own people. You cannot run an agency or a company or a country while suspecting everyone constantly. Trust is the grease that makes the whole machine turn, and the insider traitor turns that necessary trust into a fatal weakness, hiding not in shadows but in plain, respected, promoted sight. So as you settle in tonight, consider the quiet horror at the heart of it. The most dangerous spy was never the stranger lurking outside. It was the familiar face at the next desk, the trusted colleague, the respected insider, betraying everyone around them for years while smiling warmly and blending imperfectly, right up until the terrible moment the truth finally came home. Just as you spent your days hiding, an entire profession spent theirs hunting people exactly like you. Counterintelligence, the spy catchers, the mole hunters. These were patient, obsessive individuals who noticed the tiny wrong details, the salary that didn't match the lifestyle, the secrets that kept leaking to the same place, the pattern that formed only if you stared long enough. They didn't chase you through the streets. They built a case one dull document at a time, quietly for months or even years. Somewhere out there, someone might already have your name written at the bottom of a very short list, slowly working their way up. You would never know until it was far, far too late. Sleep tight. Counterintelligence was espionage turned inside out, a mirror image of your own craft aimed directly at you. Where you hid, they sought. Where you blended in, they searched for the seam that didn't quite line up, and they had a terrifying advantage: patience without end. They weren't in a hurry. They could afford to watch and wait and gather for as long as it took, because they knew that a spy, however careful, is a human being, and human beings eventually make mistakes. Their whole profession was built on the certainty that if they waited long enough, you would slip. The work was nothing like a chase. It was closer to accounting, which somehow made it more menacing. A mole hunter didn't sprint through alleys. They sat with documents, cross-referencing, comparing, noticing. Why did this operation fail? Why did that source go silent? Why does the trouble always seem to trace back to information that passed through one particular set of hands? They assembled a case the way a mosaic is assembled, one tiny tile at a time, until a picture no one wanted to see slowly emerged from the noise. It was tedious, meticulous, and utterly relentless. They were hunters of anomalies, and this is what should keep you up at night. The tiny inconsistency, the detail that didn't fit, the wealth that outran the paycheck, the leak that always flowed in the same direction. Any single oddity was nothing easily explained away. But a mole hunter collected oddities and knew that enough small wrong things stacked together eventually formed a shape. They lived in the space where coincidences stopped being coincidences, patiently waiting for the pattern to declare itself. To them, you weren't a person. You were a set of data points that hadn't yet lined up into a confession. And the cruelest part, the part that made this profession the quiet dread of every spy, was that you'd never know they were there. The hunt happened in silence, in offices you'd never see, in files that bore your name without your knowledge. You went about your careful life believing yourself safe, while somewhere a patient stranger inched closer, tile by tile, building the case that would end you. So as you drift off tonight, unhunted and unwatched, spare a thought for the spy who could never be sure. Somewhere out there, someone quiet and obsessive might already be working their way up a very short list, and the first the spy ever learned of it was the knock at the door, arriving years too late to run. To survive, you had to master the paranoid art of knowing when you were being followed, without ever letting on that you were checking. You learned to take long, meandering routes, to double back, to pause at shop windows and study the reflections behind you. Was that the same man from 2 blocks ago? Had that car really needed to turn where you turned? Spies called this surveillance detection, and it turned an ordinary walk into an exhausting mental chess match against enemies who might not even be there. The truly cruel part was that the watchers wanted you to feel safe. The calmer they let you get, the more you revealed. So you smiled, you strolled, and inside you never, ever relaxed. Surveillance detection was a skill born of pure necessity, because if you were being followed and didn't know it, you were finished. Lead a watcher to a dead drop, and you burn the drop. Lead one to a contact, and you burn the contact and probably yourself. So you had to know, always, whether the person behind you was innocent or a hunter, and you had to find out without ever revealing that you were looking. The moment a watcher realized you'd spotted them, the game changed instantly and rarely in your favor. So spies developed a whole quiet grammar of movement, the meandering route that no one with an honest destination would ever take, the sudden doubling back to see who was forced to react, the unnecessary turn, the paused window shopping that was really a chance to study the street's reflection, the small deliberate detours designed to flush a follower into the open. To an observer, you looked like an aimless soul enjoying a stroll. In reality, every seemingly random move was a carefully designed test, quietly asking the street a single question: is anyone here matching my path? The mental toll of this was staggering, because it never stopped. Every walk became a chess match played against opponents who might not even exist. Was that the same grey car, or just a similar one? Was that man's pause natural, or a reaction to yours? You couldn't switch it off, couldn't take a walk that was just a walk, couldn't move through the world with the easy blankness that everyone else takes for granted. Your mind ran constant background calculations, tracking faces and vehicles and timing, a permanent low hum of vigilance that wore at you like water on stone. And here was the sharpest cruelty of the whole thing. The best watchers wanted you comfortable. A relaxed spy is a careless spy. So skilled surveillance teams stayed invisible precisely to lull you into ease, knowing that the moment you believed yourself safe was the moment you'd lead them straight to everything that mattered. So you could never accept comfort, even when everything looked fine, especially when everything looked fine. So as you settle in tonight and let yourself drift, savor the ordinary luxury of a mind that's finally allowed to rest. The spy never had it. For them, even a quiet walk on an empty street was a silent duel, fought against enemies who might be everywhere or nowhere. And the only safe assumption was that the grey car you'd seen before had seen you too. Every careful spy needed a safe house, a hidden location for meetings, storage, or vanishing when things went wrong. On the outside, it was nothing. An unremarkable apartment, a rented room, a little place no one gave a second glance. Inside, it might hold your radio, your codes, your emergency documents, or simply a chair where you could finally breathe without pretending. But even the safe house wasn't truly safe, because the more it was used, the more it risked being noticed. A neighbour wondering why so many quiet visitors came and went. A landlord growing curious. In this line of work, no place was ever fully secure. They were only slightly less dangerous, and you learned to be grateful for even that. The safe house was defined entirely by what it wasn't, and that was the whole genius of it. It wasn't distinctive. It wasn't memorable. It wasn't the kind of place anyone would ever describe later, because there was nothing to describe. Just another door on another hallway, another rented room in another forgettable building, chosen precisely because it disappeared into its surroundings. A safe house that stood out was a contradiction in terms. The perfect one was the one your own eyes would slide right past, indistinguishable from the 1,000 ordinary dwellings around it. Inside, though, it served as the one place in your entire double life where you didn't have to perform. Out in the world you were always on, always smiling, always maintaining the legend, always watching the reflections in shop windows. But behind the safe house door, for a few precious moments, you could simply be a frightened, exhausted human being. You could store the incriminating equipment you couldn't keep at home, review your codes without an audience, or just sit in a plain chair and let the mask slip. It wasn't comfortable, and it wasn't warm, but it was the closest thing to rest you ever got. And yet the safe house carried a slow, creeping vulnerability built right into its purpose. Every use left a faint trace. Every visitor who came and went was a thread someone might one day pull. A safe house used once was nearly invisible. A safe house used constantly began, inevitably to attract the very attention it was meant to avoid. The neighbour who noticed that a lot of quiet people seemed to visit that quiet apartment. The landlord who wondered, idly at first, why the tenant was so rarely seen but the door so often used. Ordinary curiosity, the eternal enemy, slowly circling. So even your sanctuary demanded discipline and paranoia. You varied your arrival times. You never brought attention to the place. You treated it as precious precisely because you knew it was perishable, that any location, however carefully chosen, had a shelf life measured in how often you dared to use it. There was no such thing as permanently safe. There was only a fragile temporary safety you had to protect by using it as little as you possibly could. So as you settle into your own home tonight, a place where you can be completely, unguardedly yourself for as long as you like, Consider the strange loneliness of the safe house, a refuge that was never truly a refuge, a home that wasn't a home, a plain door behind which a tired spy sat in a borrowed chair, catching their breath, knowing that even this small stolen piece was quietly running out. The single most terrifying phrase in a spy's world was simple: someone got caught. Because spies rarely worked completely alone, and when one link in the chain was arrested, the authorities immediately began squeezing them for names. The famous atomic spy ring that fed nuclear secrets to the Soviets unraveled largely this way, one arrest leading to another, a confession here loosening a thread there, until the whole network came apart. So when your fellow agent disappeared, you didn't grieve. You panicked. Would they talk? Did they know your name, your face, your street? You sat in your quiet house, waiting for a knock, knowing that your fate now rested entirely in the courage or cowardice of someone you barely trusted. Networks were both the strength and the fatal weakness of espionage. One spy alone could only do so much, so agents were linked together, each handling a piece, each connected to others. That structure made a network powerful, but it also made it a chain, and chains have a terrible property. Pull hard on one link, and the strain travels down the whole thing. Every connection that made the network effective was also a potential path an investigator could follow, one arrest at a time, from a single captured agent all the way to you. The atomic spy ring became the grim classic example of exactly this collapse. It didn't fall because someone stormed a fortress. It fell because one thread came loose and investigators simply kept pulling. An arrest produced a name. That name produced another arrest, which produced another confession, which loosened yet another thread. Piece by piece, person by person, a network that had passed some of the most consequential secrets of the century came apart, undone not by a single dramatic blow, but by the slow, methodical unravelling that begins the moment one person starts to talk. So the news that a fellow agent had been caught didn't bring sorrow. It brought raw, immediate fear. Your first thought wasn't for them. It was a cold, selfish jolt of self-preservation. What did they know? Your name, your face, the street where you lived? How many links separated you from them, and were those links strong enough to hold? Suddenly, your own survival hinged entirely on a person you might barely know, whose courage under pressure you had no way to predict. You were, in that moment, utterly at the mercy of someone else's breaking point. And so began the worst waiting of your life, the terrible silence after a fellow agent fell. You couldn't run without confirming your guilt. You couldn't stay without risking everything. So you simply waited in your quiet house, listening. Every ordinary sound suddenly sinister. Every car outside a possible arrival, wondering with each passing hour whether the thread had reached you yet. It was a helplessness few things in life can match, your entire fate resting not in your own careful hands, but in the resolve of a distant, frightened stranger. So as you drift off tonight, secure in a life where a stranger's confession can't end you, consider that long, dreadful vigil. The spy alone in the dark after the person beside them fell, waiting for a knock that might come in an hour, might come in a year, or might, if they were very lucky and someone else was very brave, never come at all. Here's a betrayal that kept spies awake even more than the enemy. Your own handlers might sacrifice you. To the people you worked for, you were not a friend, you were an asset, and assets are expendable. If keeping you safe became inconvenient, if trading you away served a larger goal, if you simply stopped being useful, You could be abandoned or quietly given up without a second thought. You'd risked everything for them, and they'd shrug and move on. This is the loneliest truth of the whole miserable profession. You trusted no one on the other side, and you couldn't fully trust your own side either. You were valuable right up until the exact moment you weren't. The word itself told you everything. Asset. Not partner, not friend, not comrade. An asset is a resource, a thing that exists to be used, and things that are used are, by their nature, things that can be used up. That single cold noun captured the entire brutal relationship between a spy and the people they served. You might have felt loyalty, even devotion, pouring your courage and your safety into their cause. To them, you were a line in a ledger, valuable while your value lasted, and no longer. And so the calculations were always running, silently, in offices you'd never see. Was keeping you safe worth the cost? Did protecting you serve the larger goal or hinder it? Could you be traded for something more important, spent like currency in some deal you'd never even hear about? Your handlers made these judgments coldly, weighing your life against objectives you weren't privy to. You imagined yourself as a person to them. In their arithmetic, you were a variable, and variables get sacrificed when the equation calls for it. The deepest wound in this was the sheer imbalance of it. You had given everything, your safety, your identity, your peace of mind, your ordinary life. All of it surrendered for their cause. You'd lied to your neighbours and hidden things in your walls and lain awake listening for cars. And in return they offered no matching loyalty, only use. If abandoning you served their purposes, they would abandon you and feel nothing. All that sacrifice on your side met with a shrug on theirs. It was the most one-sided relationship imaginable, and you'd signed up for it without fully understanding the terms. This is what made espionage the loneliest work in the world. An ordinary person under threat can at least trust their own side, can believe that their people have their back. The spy had no such comfort. The enemy wanted to catch you, obviously, but your own side might spend you, and so there was no one, anywhere, you could fully trust. You stood entirely alone, surrounded by people who either hunted you or used you, with no true ally in either direction. So as you settle into sleep tonight, safe among people who are genuinely on your side, consider the bottomless solitude of the spy who had no side at all. Valued right up until the moment they weren't, they served a cause that would sacrifice them without hesitation, and the cruelest part was that deep down they always knew it. Every spy who lasted had at least one close call that aged them a decade in a single afternoon. A dropped package retrieved a heartbeat before the wrong person turned the corner. A coded message nearly found during a routine visit. A neighbour who asked one too many pointed questions with one too many knowing looks. In those moments, your entire body screamed to run, and your training screamed louder to stand still and smile. You'd talk your way out with a calm you did not feel, laughing at the absurdity while your mind sprinted through escape routes. And afterward, alone, you'd shake like a leaf, pour a stiff drink, and realize with cold clarity just how thin the thread you dangled from really was. The close call was an inevitable feature of a life built on deception, not a rare misfortune. Live long enough in a web of lies, and eventually a thread snaps at the wrong moment. A visitor arrives unexpectedly. A question lands too close to the truth. A routine check nearly turns up the one thing you couldn't explain away. These moments arrived without warning, out of clear skies, transforming an ordinary afternoon into a heart-stopping emergency in the space of a single sentence. And there was no preparing for the timing, only for the response. What made these moments so uniquely awful was the violent war between instinct and training. Every animal nerve in your body screamed the same primal command: run, flee, get away now. And your training screamed back, louder and colder: do not move, do not react, hold the mask, smile. The correct response was almost always the exact opposite of what terror demanded. You had to stand perfectly still while your entire nervous system howled for flight, had to project easy calm while adrenaline flooded through you like ice water. It was the hardest thing the job ever asked, and it asked it without warning. So you performed in the most important role of your life, with no rehearsal and no second take. You laughed off the pointed question. You explained the strange detail with an easy, unbothered shrug. You made small talk with the curious neighbour while your mind, hidden behind calm eyes, raced through exits and escape routes and cover stories at desperate speed. To anyone watching, you were relaxed, amused, entirely innocent. Inside, you were sprinting. The gap between the serene face and the screaming interior was so vast it hardly seemed possible one person could hold both at once, and yet holding both was the entire job. And then, when the danger finally passed, when the neighbour wandered off satisfied, or the visitor left none the wiser, the aftermath hit you all at once. Alone at last, the mask you'd held so perfectly would finally shatter, and the fear you'd swallowed came roaring back. Your hands shook, your legs went weak. You'd pour that stiff drink and sit in the sudden ringing quiet, understanding with brutal clarity just how close it had been, how thin the thread, how nearly everything had ended in that ordinary terrible moment. So as you settle in tonight, in a life where an afternoon is just an afternoon, spare a thought for the spy after the close call, alone and trembling in the dark, drink in an unsteady hand, staring at the wall, marvelling that they'd survived one more time and quietly dreading the next. For most spies who hid in plain sight, the story ended the same quiet way, not with a shootout, but with a knock. Robert Hanssen, one of the most damaging moles in American history, was finally arrested at a park after making one last dead drop. The trap sprung after years of patient hunting. That was how it usually went. No dramatic chase, no daring final stand, just calm figures appearing at your door or stepping out from behind the trees, saying your real name in a tone that told you they'd known it for a long time. And in that instant, the double life collapsed. The cover, the neighbours, the fake smiles, all of it gone, replaced by the strange, almost peaceful horror of finally being seen. There was bitter irony in how these stories ended, given how they'd been lived. A life built on adrenaline and secrecy, on narrow escapes and hidden radios and coded messages, tended to end not in a blaze but in a whisper. The people who caught spies weren't action heroes. They were patient professionals who'd done the quiet, grinding work of building a case, and by the time they moved with total certainty. There was nothing left to chase. The hunt was already over. All that remained was the calm, procedural act of collection. Robert Hanssen's ending was the perfect grim template. He'd betrayed his own agency for years, one of the most damaging moles the country had ever known, and yet his capture held no drama at all. He was arrested at a park, taken as he completed one final dead drop, the trap closing around him after years of silent, patient pursuit. No struggle, no shootout, just the machinery of counterintelligence finally clicking shut, on a man who'd believed himself uncatchable. The very ordinariness of it was the point. He fell exactly the way he'd lived, quietly. The signature of these endings was that terrible calm. There was no chase, because a chase means the outcome's uncertain, and by the time they came for you, nothing was uncertain at all. They knew your name, your face, your crimes, your street, so they simply appeared, figures at your door or stepping unhurried from behind the trees, and spoke your real name, your true name, in a flat, knowing tone that told you instantly they'd known it for a very long time. In that single spoken word, the whole elaborate architecture of your false life fell silently to dust. And what followed, strangely, was something almost like relief buried inside the horror. For years you'd performed, watched, hidden, lied, carried the crushing weight of a secret every waking hour. Now, in the moment of capture, the performance was finally, permanently over. There was nothing left to protect, no mask left to hold, no reflection left to check. You had spent your entire double life terrified of being seen, and now at last you were seen completely, and the exhausting work of hiding was done. So as you drift off tonight, unhunted and unknown, consider that quiet ending waiting at the close of so many secret lives. Not a bang, not a chase, but a knock, a calm voice speaking a true name, and the strange, terrible peace of a hidden person finally, fully found. Once caught, you faced the interrogation, and it was rarely the shouting, table-slamming spectacle of the movies. It was worse, quiet, patient, and psychologically brutal. They already knew things, more than you expected, and they let you feel that. They offered you deals, comfort, understanding, a way out. If you would just talk, just confirm, just name the others. They played on your exhaustion and your fear, waiting for the one small crack. Some spies held firm out of loyalty or pride. Many crumbled, trading secrets for a lighter sentence. Sitting in that bright, featureless room, you finally understood that the loneliest part of the job wasn't the years of hiding. It was this. The moment when your silence was the only thing you had left. The reality of interrogation was far more unsettling than any dramatic screaming match, because its power came from patience rather than force. This skilled interrogator didn't rage. They waited. They understood that fear and exhaustion do the work that shouting never could, that a frightened, tired person left alone with their own dread will often crack open on their own. So the room was calm, almost gentle, and that calm was the weapon. Nothing to push against, nothing to resist, just quiet, relentless patience slowly wearing you down. And they let you know, subtly, how much they already had. They'd reveal a detail you thought was buried, mention a fact you were sure was secret, and let the implication settle over you like a cold fog. We know more than you think. Maybe they knew everything already. Maybe your silence was pointless, protecting secrets they'd long since uncovered. That creeping uncertainty was designed to erode your will, to make holding out feel not brave but foolish, a stubborn refusal to accept a game that was already over. Then came the offers, warm and reasonable, the most dangerous part of all. A deal, a lighter sentence, comfort, understanding, a way out of the fear, if you would only talk, only confirm, only give up a few names. They positioned themselves not as your enemy, but as your last friend in the world, the one person offering you a path out of the nightmare. All you had to do was betray the others. After a lifetime of trusting no one, here at last was someone holding out a hand, and the exhaustion whispered that maybe, just maybe, you should take it. Under that patient pressure, people broke, and it's hard to judge them for it. Some held firm, sustained by loyalty or pride or sheer stubbornness. But many crumbled, trading their secrets for mercy, naming their comrades to lighten their own load, because the human spirit has limits, and the interrogators knew exactly where those limits lived. And in that bright, featureless room, the final, loneliest truth of the whole profession revealed itself. After all the years of hiding, all you had left was your silence, and silence, it turned out, was the hardest thing of all to keep. So as you settle into sleep tonight, among people you'd never need to hold out against, consider the spy alone in that quiet, patient room, exhausted and afraid, discovering that the loneliest moment of a lonely life was the one where the only thing left to protect was the secrets locked behind their own tired lips. Not every captured spy met a grim end. Some became bargaining chips in the strangest transactions of the Cold War, the spy swap. When the man known as Rudolph Abel was caught, he was eventually exchanged for the captured American pilot Francis Gary Powers, the two sides trading prisoners on the fog-shrouded Glienicke Bridge between East and West. Decades later, when a network of deep-cover Russian sleeper agents was rolled up on American soil, they too were swapped, quietly handed back in exchange for others. These exchanges were tense, silent, and cinematic in the truest sense. Two enemies meeting in the cold to trade the people they'd spent years trying to catch. If you were lucky, you weren't the end of a story. You were the price of someone else's freedom. The spy swap was one of the odder rituals of the Cold War, a strange acknowledgement that even bitter enemies sometimes found it useful to deal. Both sides held captured agents. Both sides wanted their own people back. And so, through quiet channels and careful negotiation, they arranged to trade, matching prisoner for prisoner in exchanges conducted far from the public eye. It was a grim sort of commerce. Human beings exchanged like goods, but for the spy involved, it could mean the difference between rotting in a cell and walking free. The exchange of Rudolph Abel became the iconic image of the whole practice. Caught running a Soviet network, he was eventually traded for Francis Gary Powers, the American pilot whose spy plane had been shot down over Soviet territory. The two were exchanged on the Glienicke Bridge, that misty span between East and West that earned its lasting nickname from precisely these transfers. It was espionage's theatre at its most striking. Two hostile powers meeting on a fog-wrapped bridge to hand back the very people they'd worked so hard to catch, then turning and walking away. And the practice endured well beyond that famous moment. Decades later, when a ring of deep-cover Russian sleeper agents, people who had spent years living quietly as ordinary Americans, was finally exposed and rolled up, they too became currency. Rather than simply imprisoning them, arrangements were made and they were quietly swapped, handed back in exchange for others held on the opposing side. The faces changed and the decades passed, but the cold logic remained the same. A captured spy was not always an ending. Sometimes they were simply a price to be paid. There was a peculiar theatre to these exchanges, tense and silent and unforgettable. Two sides meeting in the cold grey light, prisoners walking past each other in opposite directions, no words exchanged, no drama, just the quiet completion of a bargain struck in secret. For the spy being traded, it was a surreal deliverance, freedom arriving not through escape or acquittal, but through their own value as a bargaining chip. So as you drift off tonight, consider that strange fate at the edge of the spy's world. The fog-shrouded bridge at dawn, the silent walk to freedom, the captured agent who turned out not to be the end of a story at all but the price of someone else's, handed back across a line between two worlds that could agree on almost nothing except the occasional quiet trade. For the unluckiest, though, hiding in plain sight ended in the ultimate price. In the earliest days of American espionage, a young schoolteacher turned spy named Nathan Hale was captured and hanged by the British, remembered ever after for facing the noose with quiet defiance. Nearly 2 centuries later, Julius and Ethel Rosenberg were executed after being convicted of passing atomic secrets, a case that remains fiercely debated to this day. These were the sobering reminders beneath all the clever tradecraft and comic embarrassment. The stakes were never a joke. For the spy who hid in plain sight, exposure could mean not just prison, but the end of everything, a life that vanished as completely and silently as it had once blended in. Beneath all the elegant tradecraft and awkward crouching in parks lay a truth that no amount of dark humour could soften. For some spies, the game ended in death. Not prison, not a quiet trade on a bridge, but execution. This was the shadow that fell across the entire profession, the ultimate stake that made every close call and every interrogation so terrifying. The clever disguises and hollow coins could be laughed about, but the gallows and the electric chair could not. When the mask finally failed for the unluckiest agents, it failed completely and forever. Nathan Hale stood at the very beginning of this grim American tradition. A young schoolteacher who took up spying for the revolutionary cause, he was captured by the British and hanged. His career as an agent tragically brief. But he was remembered ever after for the quiet defiance with which he faced his execution, meeting death with a composure that turned a failed mission into an enduring symbol. His story set an early and sobering tone. This work could cost you your life, and it could cost it young, and the only thing left to control was how you faced the end. Nearly 2 centuries later, the execution of Julius and Ethel Rosenberg showed that the ultimate price had not grown any less severe with time. Convicted of passing atomic secrets, they were put to death in a case that remains bitterly debated to this very day. Its questions of guilt and degree still argued long after the fact. Whatever one believes about the details, the outcome was stark and undeniable. Espionage, when it went wrong, could end at the executioner's hands. The stakes had not softened. If anything, in an age of atomic secrets, they had grown heavier than ever. These were the stories that anchored the whole subject, that reminded you why the spy's every waking hour was shadowed by fear. Behind the amusing image of a grown adult hiding film under a rock stood the gallows and the grimmer machinery of the state. Exposure didn't just mean the collapse of a cover story. For the unluckiest, it meant the collapse of everything. A life extinguished as silently and completely as it had once blended into an ordinary street. So as you settle into the safety of your bed tonight, let this be the sobering weight beneath all the cleverness and comedy. The spy who hid in plain sight was always, every single day, gambling with the highest stake there is, and for some, the quiet life that had vanished so perfectly into the crowd, vanished, in the end, altogether. And then there are the spies who simply got away, the ones whose names we may never know at all. For every agent dragged into a bright room and a headline, there were surely others who quietly finished their work, packed up their fake lives, and dissolved back into the ordinary world without a trace. Some retired peacefully under names that were never theirs. Some grew old on quiet streets, tending gardens beside neighbours who never suspected a thing. It's an unsettling thought to carry towards sleep, that the most successful spies in history are, by definition, the ones you've never heard of, because success in this profession didn't mean fame. It meant being forgotten completely, on purpose, forever. This is the strangest corner of the entire subject, the one that resists every attempt to examine it, because by its very nature it leaves nothing to examine. We know about the spies who were caught, because catching them made noise, made records, made headlines. But the successful ones left no such trace. They finished their work and disappeared cleanly, and the measure of their success is precisely that we have no idea who they were. History records the failures. The triumphs in this profession are invisible by design. Think of what a truly successful career looked like from the inside. An agent moves into a community, does the delicate work, gathers what they came for, and then, before any thread comes loose, quietly withdraws. They pack up the hidden radio, dismantle the false life, and slip away as smoothly as they arrived, leaving behind only the memory of a pleasant, forgettable neighbour who moved on. No arrest, no trial, no bright room, no bridge at dawn. Just a clean exit and a return to some ordinary existence, the entire operation folded up and carried off without anyone ever knowing it had happened at all. And some of them surely simply grew old. They retired under names that were never truly theirs, settled into quiet lives, and let the decades pass. They tended gardens. They chatted with neighbours over the fence about the weather and the state of the lawn. They became the harmless old man on the corner, the pleasant elderly woman who always waved, living out their final years in perfect anonymity beside people who never had the faintest idea that the gentle retiree next door had once lived a secret life of codes and dead drops and mortal risk. The performance simply became permanent, and eventually it was no longer a performance at all. It's a genuinely unsettling thought to carry into the dark, because it means the true masters of this craft are, and will always remain, completely unknown to us. Fame in espionage was failure. To be remembered was to have been caught. The real successes vanished into the ordinary world and stayed there, their triumph sealed forever behind the anonymity that made them possible. So as you drift towards sleep tonight, consider the ghosts who were never caught, the quiet ones who did the work and walked away clean, growing old under borrowed names on peaceful streets. The most successful spies in all of history are people you have never heard of and never will, and that, precisely that, is exactly how they won. So here you are, at the end of a long, paranoid, exhausting imaginary life, and the strangest lesson settles over you like a warm blanket. Hiding in plain sight never really went away. The tools changed. The invisible ink became invisible code. The hollow coins became hidden files. But the craft is exactly the same. Somewhere, right now, someone perfectly ordinary is living a life that isn't quite real, waving at neighbours, filing paperwork, complimenting casseroles, and keeping a secret you'd never guess in 1,000 years. The most dangerous spies were never the ones in the shadows. They were the ones standing in the light, smiling, blending in, utterly unremarkable. And the truly wild part is that the whole system worked precisely because we could never bring ourselves to suspect the quiet person next door. You've lived, over these imaginary hours, an entire secret existence, and it has left you exhausted in a way no ordinary life ever could. You've been recruited by a patient friend, built a whole fake self, crouched by rocks at dawn, sweated over coded arithmetic, trembled through close calls, and dreaded a knock that might come at any moment. And through all of it, one thread held constant from the very beginning. The entire art was never about vanishing into darkness. It was about disappearing into the light, into the ordinary, into the crowd of forgettable faces that no one ever thinks to examine. That's the lesson that outlasts every specific trick. The technology marched on, endlessly. The invisible ink of the culper ring became invisible digital code. The hollow coins and microdots became hidden files. The radio in the attic became 1,000 quieter channels. But the fundamental craft, the human heart of it, never changed at all. Hide the secret inside the ordinary. Become so unremarkable that no one looks twice. Let the world's own assumptions about who could possibly be dangerous do the work of protecting you. From the revolution to the present day, that core idea has never gone out of style, because it never stops working, and so it continues, right now, somewhere, in a life that looks exactly like every other life on a quiet street. Someone perfectly ordinary is waving at their neighbours, filing their paperwork, showing up at the barbecue, complimenting the casserole, and carrying a secret you would never guess in 1,000 years. They are not lurking in an alley. They are standing in the sunlight, smiling, blending in, as forgettable as beige. The most dangerous people were never the ones who looked the part. They were the ones who looked like no part at all, like nothing, like the pleasant blur of a face you're sure you've never really seen. Which leaves us with the quietly astonishing truth at the very centre of it all. The whole system worked because of a single, deeply human blind spot. We simply cannot bring ourselves to suspect the ordinary. The quiet neighbour, the boring co-worker, the harmless retiree tending the garden. Our minds file them away as safe and stop looking, and that reflex, that gentle refusal to imagine danger in the unremarkable, is the very thing every great spy relied upon. So as you finally let go and drift towards sleep tonight, safe in your bed, in your home, on your own quiet street, you can rest easy, knowing your neighbours are almost certainly exactly who they appear to be. Almost certainly. And if one of them waves a little too warmly tomorrow morning, remembers your dog's name a little too precisely, compliments your casserole with just a little too much practiced ease, well, it's probably nothing. Probably. Good night. So there you have it. A whole secret life, lived and lost in the quiet spaces of ordinary streets. You've been recruited by a friend who was never really a friend, built a fake self so complete you nearly forgot the real one, and crouched in the cold dawn hiding secrets under stones. You've sweated over coded arithmetic, trembled through close calls that aged you a decade, and lain awake listening for a knock that might come tonight, tomorrow, or never at all. It was a life of constant performance, endless watching, and a loneliness so deep that you couldn't fully trust the enemy hunting you or the very people you served. And through all of it, the strangest truth held firm. The most dangerous people in history were never the shadowy figures of the movies. They were the quiet ones standing in plain sight, waving from the driveway, remembering your dog's name, blending in so perfectly that no one ever thought to look twice. Tonight, as you settle into your soft bed, in a home where you can be exactly, unguardedly yourself, take a moment to appreciate a rare and wonderful luxury. You have no secret to keep, no cover to maintain, no reflection to check, no false name to remember before your first cup of coffee. You can simply be one person, wholly and honestly, and let your mind wander wherever it likes without a single coded schedule to guard. Because history is full of people who lived on a razor's edge so the rest of us could sleep soundly, and their stories are proof that even in a world of secrets and suspicion, most of us get to live plainly, safely and free. So breathe slow, let your shoulders fall and drift off, knowing you have nothing at all to hide. Good night.